For 31 years, I kept the books for my husband's dental practice and ran my own catering business out of our home kitchen in Guelph, Ontario. That's how it started. Me in a commercial-grade apron at 5 in the morning, him asleep upstairs, and the smell of butter tarts and wild mushroom vol au vents filling the whole house. By the time he got up for coffee, I'd already have the van loaded. I never thought much about the imbalance of it. That's what you do when you love someone. You just do. My catering company, I called it Fieldstone Kitchen after the old farmhouse we'd bought in 1998, grew from wedding receptions in church basements to corporate luncheons at the Waterloo Tech Parks to full event production for provincial government functions in Toronto. I hired 15 staff. I leased a commercial kitchen space on Speedvale Avenue. I drove 40 minutes each way, 6 days a week, for nearly 2 decades. My husband was proud of me. He said so at dinner parties. He liked to tell people his wife ran a little catering thing and then watch their faces when they found out it turned over $1 million a year. I turned 63 in March. 2 weeks after my birthday, I got a call from a man in Calgary who represented a hospitality group looking to acquire regional catering brands across Canada. They wanted Fieldstone Kitchen. They wanted the client list, the staff contracts, the recipes, the vans, everything. We went back and forth for 4 months. I had my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia out of a firm on McDonald Street who I'd used for years. I did not tell my husband what was happening until the papers were essentially ready to sign. Not because I was hiding anything, because I'd learned over the years that he had a way of making my things feel smaller. And I didn't want this to feel smaller before it was finished. The final number was $2.9 million. I signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Patricia shook my hand across the conference table and said, "Congratulations, Marian, you built something real." I sat in my car in the parking lot on Stone Road for about 20 minutes afterward. I didn't cry exactly. It was more like the air went out of me. 31 years of early mornings and sore feet and spreadsheets and the particular exhaustion of caring deeply about something. And now it was done, and it was worth $2.9 million, and I had nowhere to be. I decided to drive to my husband's practice and tell him in person. He had a dental office in a medical building on Edinburgh Road. He'd been there for 22 years. I knew every person in that office by name. I brought Christmas baking there every December, dropped off lunch for the staff during their renovation year, sat in the waiting room with a book more times than I could count when we were down to one car. I parked and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The receptionist, a new woman who'd started maybe 8 months before, young, couldn't have been more than 26, looked up when I pushed open the glass door and something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly. Something else. She recovered quickly and smiled and said my husband was just finishing up with a patient. I sat down. There was a Country Living magazine from August on the side table, and I picked it up and didn't read it. He came out of the back hallway a few minutes later and stopped when he saw me. Just for a second. One of those pauses that you don't notice at the time and only understand later. "Marian," he said, "everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful," I said. "I wanted to tell you something in person." He suggested we step into his office. We went down the hall, past the treatment rooms, and he closed the door behind us. He leaned against his desk the way he always did, arms crossed, a habit from 35 years of marriage. I knew his body language the way I knew my own kitchen. Every cupboard, every drawer. I told him about the sale, about Calgary, about the $2.9 million. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Marian, that's extraordinary." He hugged me. He smelled like antiseptic and the same cedar soap he'd used for 30 years. I hugged him back. I was happy. I want to be honest about that. In that moment, I was genuinely happy, and I believed he was too. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I made pasta for dinner. We opened a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir we'd been saving. He asked good questions about the transition timeline, about whether I had any regrets, about what I wanted to do next. He refilled my glass. He said we should take a trip. He mentioned the Maritimes, somewhere we'd talked about for years. It was a lovely evening. I went to bed thinking that the next chapter was going to be good. I found out 11 days later. My younger daughter, she lives in Hamilton with her partner and their little boy, called me on a Wednesday morning while I was pruning the cedar hedge out back. She asked if I was sitting down. I told her I was outside. She said I should go inside. She told me that her father had been seeing someone for close to 3 years, a woman he'd met through a continuing education course for dental professionals in Niagara-on-the-Lake. She was 39. She worked in practice management consulting. My daughter had found out through a cousin who'd seen them together at a restaurant in Burlington in September and hadn't known what to do with the information. The cousin had finally told my daughter the week before. My daughter had spent 7 days deciding whether to tell me. She was crying by the time she finished. I was standing in the kitchen, still holding my pruning shears. I said, "Thank you for telling me." I hung up and stood there for a long time. The thing people don't tell you about that kind of news is how quiet it is. I'd expected something louder inside myself. Instead, I just stood in my kitchen. The kitchen I'd worked in for 30 years. The kitchen where I'd built a business, where I'd made birthday cakes and Christmas dinners and packed lunches for children who were now adults. And I felt the particular silence of understanding that something had been true for a long time without your knowledge. 3 years. He had been doing this for 3 years. Our granddaughter's first Christmas, my mother's hip surgery, the winter I drove to Barrie 3 times a week. The weekend my older daughter got married at a vineyard in Niagara. He'd held my hand during the vows. He'd cried. I'd thought it was because he was happy. I did not call him. I called Patricia instead. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what my daughter had told me. I said I needed to understand where I stood before I did anything else. She said to come in the next morning. I went in the next morning. I sat across from her desk and she walked me through everything carefully. Fieldstone Kitchen had been incorporated in my name in 2003, before we'd made any significant joint financial decisions around it. The sale proceeds were mine. Ontario family law would require full financial disclosure in any separation proceeding, but the business assets and the sale proceeds were traceable to me and were likely to be treated as excluded property under the Family Law Act, particularly given that I'd taken the legal precaution years ago, on Patricia's advice actually, of keeping the business accounts entirely separate from our household accounts. My husband had never been listed as a director or shareholder. He had no documented claim. Patricia also told me, gently, that I should speak to no one, including my husband, about the $2.9 million until we had taken some preliminary steps. I had already told him. She paused. She said, "How did he react?" I said he'd seemed happy for me. She said, "He may have been calculating." I drove home. I made a list. I am a person who makes lists. I ran a catering business. Lists were how I survived. I wrote down what I knew, what I didn't know, and what I needed to do. Then I made dinner because I didn't know when he was coming home and I needed something to do with my hands. He came home at 6:30. Normal time. Normal everything. He kissed me on the cheek and asked what smelled good. I put the food on the table and I sat across from him and I watched his face while we ate. He talked about his day. He asked about my daughter in Hamilton. I said she was well. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me. He looked at me. Just for a second. Something moved across his face. "What do you mean?" he said. I said, "I think you know what I mean." The dinner I'd made went cold. We were at the table for 2 hours. He denied it first, then admitted it, then cried, then told me she meant nothing, then said it was complicated, then said our marriage had been difficult for years, then said he was sorry, then reached across the table for my hand. I didn't take it. I asked him directly, "How long?" He said about 2.5 years. I said my daughter had been told 3. He looked down at the table. I had my answer. I told him I needed him to stay somewhere else while I got my bearings. He asked if I was sure. I said I was very sure. He went upstairs and packed a bag. I sat at the table and listened to him moving around above me. After 35 years of marriage, I could trace his path through the house by the sounds. Bedroom. Closet. Bathroom. Closet again. He came downstairs with a duffel bag. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. He said, "I love you, Marian. I hope you know that." I said, "I know you think you do." He left. I called Patricia the next morning and formally engaged her for the separation. She advised me to begin organizing all financial documents and to refrain from any major financial decisions or disclosures in the interim. I spent the next week pulling together 35 years of paper. It was not nothing. It was filing boxes and accordion folders and a fireproof safe in the basement that I hadn't opened in 4 years. Through Patricia, I was connected with a financial advisor at a wealth management firm in Kitchener who worked specifically with women going through late-life separation. Her name, I won't share. She is still working and I want to protect her privacy, but she was the most grounding presence I encountered through that entire period. She sat with me for 3 hours the first meeting. We talked about what I had, what I'd built, what I needed for the next 30 years, and what would be required of me emotionally and practically to protect it. My husband's lawyer contacted Patricia about 6 weeks into the process. He wanted to discuss the Fieldstone Kitchen sale. His position was that my husband had supported the household for decades, enabling me to invest in the business, and that on that basis he had an equitable interest in the sale proceeds. Patricia replied in writing. The reply outlined that the business had been incorporated prior to any joint financial arrangement around it, that my husband had never held any ownership stake, directorial role, or formal involvement in Fieldstone Kitchen, that the household finances and business finances had been documented separately throughout the marriage, and that the sale proceeds were excluded property under Section 4 of the Family Law Act. She attached 3 years of clean business financials and the original incorporation documents from 2003. His lawyer did not respond for 10 days. When they did, the position had shifted. There was no further mention of the Fieldstone Kitchen proceeds. What followed was still not easy. 35 years of shared life has to be unwound carefully. And there were things we owned together. The house in Guelph, the RRSP contributions, the joint savings that required real negotiation. I won't pretend that process was without pain. There were days I was angry in ways I didn't have language for. There were days I sat in my car in parking lots as I'd done the day of the sale and just waited for whatever I was feeling to pass. My daughters were extraordinary. My older one, who works in HR in Ottawa, came home 3 weekends in a row and sat with me at the kitchen table and helped me think. My younger one, who'd been the one to call me that Wednesday morning, called every day for 2 months. My granddaughter, who is 4 and knows nothing of any of this, sat in my lap during a visit in December and fell asleep watching a cartoon, and I held her and thought, there is still so much that is good. The separation was finalized 8 months after that Tuesday in October, when I'd sat in the parking lot thinking the next chapter was going to be good. It was still going to be good. It was still going to be good. It just looked different than I'd imagined. I sold the Guelph house. We both agreed it made more sense than either of us buying out the other, and I bought a smaller place in Elora, a stone house actually, one of those 19th century limestone houses that Ontario is full of, with wide plank floors and a garden that runs down to the Grand River. I have a good kitchen. I always have a good kitchen. I don't cater anymore, but I cook for my neighbors when they have new babies or go through losses. I'm on the board of a local food bank. I took a watercolor class at the community center in the winter and discovered, at 63, that I have no talent for it whatsoever, and I go back every week anyway. There's a man I've had dinner with twice. He's a retired high school geography teacher from Fergus. He is quiet in the way I've come to understand is actually quite rare, not distant, just undemanding. He makes good coffee and he knows a lot about the Grand River watershed, and on our second dinner he made me laugh so hard I knocked my wine glass over and he didn't make a thing of it. I don't know what that becomes. I don't need to know right now. What I know is that I built something. I built it early in the morning and late at night and through every ordinary Wednesday of my adult life, and it was mine and it stayed mine, and I am okay. I am more than okay. I want to say that clearly, for anyone listening who is somewhere in the middle of what I went through, the paperwork, the shock, the grief that is not quite grief, because the person is still alive, but everything you thought was true is not. You will get to the other side of it. Keep your own accounts, know what you own, find a good lawyer before you need one, and do not let anyone make your things feel smaller than they are. Fieldstone Kitchen was sold for $2.9 million. I built that. And everything that came after, the stone house, the garden, the man from Fergus who doesn't make a thing of spilled wine, I'm building that too. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that October, not in any mystical sense, just the plain, observable way that choices accumulate over years until they become a life, and then one day you have to look at that life clearly and decide what to do with it. My husband made choices for 3 years, small ones at first, I imagine. A conversation that went too long, a dinner he shouldn't have gone to, a lie that was easier than the truth, and then each of those choices made the next one simpler. That's how it works. Not a single dramatic fall, but a long, gradual slope that you don't notice you're on until you're very far down. I made choices too. I chose, 31 years ago, to keep Fieldstone Kitchen in my name. Not because I was suspicious. I wasn't. Not for a second. But because Patricia had said it was clean and simple, and I liked things that were clean and simple. I chose to keep the business accounts separate. I chose to stay on top of my own paperwork. Those weren't grand strategic decisions. They were just habits of a person who'd grown up watching her own mother lose things because she hadn't understood what she owned. What I've come to believe, and I say this as someone who has now lived on the other side of it, is that integrity and practicality are not separate things. My husband thought of his dishonesty as something that existed apart from the rest of his life, a compartment. But there are no compartments. The way you do one thing is, eventually, the way you do everything. His carelessness with the truth in private became carelessness with the truth when his lawyer tried to claim money he had no right to. His disregard for what I'd built showed up in that pause when he first heard the number. Not joy, but calculation. You can't fake who you are indefinitely. The truth of a person comes out in the moments that matter. The thing about intelligence, not book intelligence, but the practical kind, the kind that keeps you standing, is that it's mostly just attention. Paying attention to what you own, paying attention to what you own in a room, paying attention to the faces of people who are supposed to love you. I had missed things I shouldn't have missed. But I had also paid attention in the ways that protected me when I needed protecting. I was grateful for that. I still am. And resilience. I used to think resilience meant not breaking. I don't think that anymore. I think resilience is just the decision to do the next thing. Drive to the lawyer's office. Make a list. Call your daughter back. Buy the stone house in Elora. Show up to watercolor class even though you're terrible at it. None of those things are heroic. They're just the next thing and then the next. And eventually you look up and you're somewhere entirely different from where the hard part happened. Marian's story is not a story about a villain and a victim. It's a story about what accumulates on both sides. The years of early mornings that built something real. The years of small deceits that dismantled something else. Both things are true. Both things had consequences. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, keep your own accounts. Know what belongs to you. Find people around you who tell you the truth. And do the next thing, whatever it is. That's all resilience ever really is.